Even in our day and age, there is still discrimination in the workplace. To learn more, we talked to someone who specializes in fighting against this discrimination for the people in our community.
I see a lot of cases where there's some sort of gender inequality that has been raised, and the gender inequality can be from pay to termination of somebody's employment to failure to promote. The most recent case I've had involving a failure to promote aspect was a female employee of a pharmaceutical company where she alleged that she had been harassed by a male supervisor. The male supervisor actually, once he came into, took over the position of vice president of this company, took some of his male subordinates out to an exotic dance club and seemed to treat the males differently from the females. She complained about him, as did a couple of the other female subordinates. And she had, in the process of making complaints, she had also tried to get jobs that were management level jobs, which she was very well qualified for. And he was the ultimate decision maker, and I think partly it was retaliation, partly he wanted to promote some of the guys that he worked with, some of the guys he took to the strip club. He denied her the opportunity of promotion. So I see a lot more cases along the lines of failure to promote. Sometimes you see the wage disparity cases come up. I haven't seen that many of them recently, but certainly the retaliation claims when there is some sort of complaint to HR of harassment or something else. Mm-hmm. I think it's a fascinating time to live after Trump being elected. There's been some suggestion that he's going to roll back a lot of regulations, obviously in relation to the EPA and the environment, but there's a question as to whether he's going to affect the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's enforcement and roll back some of the enforcement regulations. At the same time, there is a political climate where people may feel more free in stating things that previously had been politically incorrect. There's a danger in that, and with regard to employment practices, management has to be very careful not to make biased statements, because if they make biased statements on the basis of sex, on the basis of gender, on the basis of disability, that's unlawful. You cannot make a statement about an employee, especially a subordinate employee, that incorporates some sort of prejudice or bias. There seems to be more of a climate of that, and individuals are not within their free speech rights to make those sort of statements in the employment environment. The employment environment is highly regulated, and management is prohibited from taking action, adverse employment action especially, on the basis of somebody's protected characteristic. Protected characteristics include sex, gender, disability status, race, national origin, or religion. These are areas that even if somebody kind of makes a joke about somebody's religion in the place of employment, that may not per se be against the law, but it could show that the person thinks in those terms and thinks in biased terms. And if it's a manager who's supposed to be judging an employee's work without those sorts of prejudgments or biases, I think it gives rise to some sort of question of whether that manager is being fair or whether they're acting in a discriminatory fashion. The difference in the employment environment from the political environment is that there are clear laws that state you cannot do that, and there are certainly attorneys out there who are willing to enforce those laws. So if management acts in a biased way, it's going to give rise to some sort of claim probably before the EEOC. And if not the EEOC, there are state regulatory agencies such as the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. What I tend to see is that if the federal governmental agencies start to take more of a hands-off approach, state agencies tend to supplement and start to become more activist. And we're starting to see that now with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. There are more filings with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, and there's a trend, I think, where if the EEOC starts to take more of a hands-off approach in relation to discrimination, the state agency will probably become more active. I've seen over the years a little bit of a change. I mean, the first prominent case involving gender equality is a case that I teach in my human resources class at Villanova. It's referred to as the Price Waterhouse versus Hopkins case. It was, I believe, a 1989 case, so it was, it took place, the facts of the case took place quite a while ago. And in that case, a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers, or actually associate of PricewaterhouseCoopers and Hopkins, had been trying to get promoted to partner. And some of the partners made statements about her, such as that she did not walk femininely enough, that she was too masculine in her approach. And the court had to decide an issue in that case, and that was, are these statements relevant for purposes of deciding whether the failure to promote her to the partnership ranks is discriminatory or not? And the court decided that yes, these offhand statements about a person that incorporates stereotypes based upon gender is unlawful. And after that case, the courts, I think, were somewhat slow to implement this sex stereotype theory. But we're seeing more cases. It's much more of an accepted theory, and it applies to sexual orientation cases as well. There was some suggestion that sexual orientation isn't in Title VII, and that's true. There is a proposed piece of legislation that's been out there since the 1970s that hasn't passed yet. You may have heard of ENDA. It's a piece of legislation that would incorporate sexual orientation as a protected class. That is not the law right now, but we do have the PricewaterhouseCoopers v. Hopkins case, which says anytime you try and judge somebody based upon assumptions as to how they should act because of their gender, that's impermissible. And we can't have that in the workplace. That's covered by Title VII, essentially. So sexual orientation is part of that. If I get a sexual orientation case where the management is making judgments about how a person should act based upon their gender because they're not heterosexual, they're not acting the way the rest of the management would act, that would be covered to me under Title VII under a sex stereotype theory that evolved from PricewaterhouseCoopers. And we're seeing more. We're also seeing state and local legislation where the federal law, which is Title VII, may not address sexual orientation, but the state laws and the local laws, especially the Philadelphia Ordinance, is directly addressing sexual orientation and prohibiting any sort of conduct on the basis of sexual orientation. So based on that, if I were to get a sexual orientation case, I would probably file it in the Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations rather than in the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is the EEOC, the primary place where a lot of these discrimination suits are filed. A case I had recently was on the defense side, where there was an allegation that my client, a manager company, solicited sexual favors from a new employee who was also male, and he alleged that his wife was in the shower at the time, and he asked him to come to his house for lunch, and the new employee, according to my client, made advances upon him. Well, the new employee made a claim of harassment, same-sex harassment, which is something that is available under the state laws and potentially under an interpretation of Title VII as well. So I've had cases along those lines, the harassment lines. I haven't had a pure LGBT sexual orientation case where it's based on stereotype discrimination in a long time. I think for the most part, companies are starting to be more tolerant, especially in this geographic area. You see cases and crop up in different geographic areas in that regard. I see a lot of cases where race is an issue in the employment environment, which is a little bit surprising because we're in 2017. And Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed way back in 1964, where there was an obvious race problem. Interestingly enough, we're seeing many more filings more recently than in the 1960s or the 1970s. And I think that reflects a number of things. One, I think people are more comfortable with raising race as an issue or other protected characteristics as an issue. And two, I think it's still out there. There are still employers who are engaging in racial animus in the workplace. We saw an uptick, especially after September 11th of 2001, in race and national origin discrimination. It's still out there. I had a case not that long ago where the manager was accused of being racist. He was a manager of a number of building maintenance workers, and the building maintenance workers were African American. He was white, and he referred to them in a derogatory way. He called them boys. He hung outside of his office on the rafters monkey figurines, and my client had taken pictures of the monkey figurines and made a complaint as to racial discrimination. Shortly thereafter, he was terminated from employment. So a lot of times what we see in these race cases is a mix of not only racial discrimination but also retaliation when somebody raises their rights under Title VII.
Would you say that after September 11th, that racial discrimination cases pertaining to like national origins of like Middle Eastern people have gone up a little bit, or do you think it's the same as before?
With regard to race discrimination or national origin discrimination really, and religious discrimination involving Middle Easterners, there continue to be cases. There was a serious uptick of cases after September 11th of 2001. I had a couple cases myself. They filtered through the system, so they don't get to the court system typically until several years after they've been initiated, or at least a couple years after they've been initiated. So there were some famous decisions involving Middle Eastern discrimination that took place that were decided in 2006. I had one as late as 2008. I'm still seeing cases where there's some racial animus involving Middle Easterns or the Muslim or Islam religion. That is still out there. There's still bias out there with respect to people who practice the Muslim religion. And I think that is going to continue given the real extreme difference in opinion that certain people have that make judgments on people because they practice a certain religion or because they look a certain way. Fortunately, there are laws that say you can't do that in the employment environment, and the laws are rather clear, so if somebody is subjected to that sort of mistreatment, they can get relief by going to the EEOC or going to the Pennsylvania State Regulatory Agency.